Now, when the Kenya Kwanza government campaigned to Kenyans before the 2022 general election, they produced or introduced to Kenyans the plan. Among the leaders we seek to bring you right here on the Daily Report, Power and Politics segment are leaders in the Kenya Kwanza government, and that includes our guest tonight, that is Senate Majority Leader, that is Aaron Cheruiyot. Under 2 years ever since the Kenya Kwanza government took the reins of power, a lot is happening. But how is the legislative agenda looking like, especially in the Senate? Tonight, we speak to the Majority Leader, that is Aaron Cheruiyot, in this exclusive interview. My name is George Maringa. Our sign language interpreter has been Catherine Simaloy. I leave you with that conversation. Do have a great night, and as always, stay safe and be kind to one another. I'll see you tomorrow on the People's Court.
Very good evening to all our viewers. You're watching the Daily Report on TV47 with me, Fred Indimuli. And today we're privileged to have with us the Senate Majority Leader, Aaron Cheruiyot. Karibu sana TV47.
Thank you, Fred.
Allowing us to come to this space. Asante sana.
Asante, thanks for the invite.
So it's been about roughly a year and a half since you assumed this position as the leader of majority in the Senate. Looking back to the 1 year and a half, what would you say are your highlights? It's a new position you've occupied.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's been a good ride so far. Succeeded in many of the endeavors that I set out to do. Of course, as a leader of majority, your main business in the previous dispensation, you are otherwise referred to as the leader of government business, which is in principle what I do, which is to ensure that legislation that enables government programs actually succeed. And you know, given the very lofty promises that Kenya Kwanza as an administration we made to the people of Kenya, there have been quite some work to be done. If you think about it, from the health sector, there are quite a number of laws that we needed to change, about 4 pieces of legislation, shifting from NHIF to Social Health Authority, and other enabling legislations of that particular arrangement. Of course, you know the journey with the housing, a very important piece of legislation that both houses of parliament had to speak and share about. Of course, there are other enabling legislations also on things to do with the division of revenue, ensuring that we send money to counties. There have been also privately sponsored legislation which enables the government achieve some of its key objectives, and therefore overseeing those on the floor of the House and in good time. Many times people complain and say, I never knew that being efficient is a problem until I became majority leader, because I see criticism sometimes that why are you moving this bill at lightning speed? And I thought, to the best of my knowledge, as they say, time waits for no man. So if you have a piece of legislation and the committee has considered, they've engaged stakeholders, they brought it to the floor, people have debated, the next thing is to conclude on that particular business. So I'm sometimes shocked to hear some of the criticism against us that you have steamrolled this legislation quickly within the corridors of parliament.
On that issue, because yes, you talk about efficiency and you've been very successful in a lot of the things you've done.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of criticism, and you acknowledge that there has been criticism about the conduct of the majority that you lead. That probably it's being misused or influenced by the executive to strong arm government policies and legislation.
No. To the contrary, it's because we are dealing with people who are yet to recover from the electoral loss. That's the whole analysis I can read out of these things. Why do I say this? Because you consider some of the things that you see our minority try to do. Of course, they don't take this work with the seriousness that it deserves. According to them, it's just another political game, which is something that I can't reconcile with my conscience, because I have been on opposition, so to speak, because of the unique situation that we found ourselves in last parliament when there was a fallout between the president and his deputy. But I do not recall a moment where I opposed legislation for the sake of it, or just tried to frustrate it, try to filibuster and do things that you're just trying to derail an agenda that will benefit people just to pass a very small point, which is the unfortunate thing that I see many of the times. I have seen colleagues from the minority side sometimes try to defeat a bill at second reading. Then eventually when we succeed at second reading, they introduce amendments in the third reading. And I'm like, wait a minute. The reason why you voted against it is because you believed that this legislation should never even have seen the light of day. How are you now all of a sudden wanting to introduce a raft of amendments to a legislation that you think shouldn't be there in the first place? So until we get to a point where people hold positions in principle and say that I do not agree with this because of the following, but allow me to change this. And I saw that it hasn't been all difficult and rough. There are legislations that we agree and but there have been, we change.
There have been claims that basically what both, and this cuts across both houses of
National Assembly and Senate.
Assembly and the Senate, that you've simply been reduced to rubber stamping most of this legislation. That even the expectation that you may add proper scrutiny or add some quality into whatever document comes from the executive, you're doing very little of that. In fact, if I may quote one of your colleagues who said that we shall not change or remove even a single comma or a full stop. That in itself indicates that whatever comes, you're simply relaying it outside. What do you say to that?
That is just political posturing, which people do out there. Actually, I think what Senator Cheruiyot meant, because he's the one who said that comment, is that we will conclude on this business in record time. But the truth of the matter, there is not one legislation, Fred, that has come to this House of Parliament in my term as majority leader from the office of the AG, from the AG's chambers, because that's where legislation from the national government comes from, and then I move it on the floor of the House, and left as is. All of them, they are minimum 10, 15 to 20 amendments on all these bills and on any matter. Talk about housing, talk about the social health insurance and all these other bills that you can think of. All of them, we work on them. The committee gets to conduct public hearings. They convince us as a house and say, this is a proposal from government, but we hold a different view. Or when certain stakeholders came, they were able to convince us that the better way to achieve what government wants is to do this. And we have always agreed with them. Therefore, those who are saying that we are rubber stamps are just perhaps not very keen on the work that we do, or probably don't understand legislation. Because the only way you would say that we are rubber stamps is if a bill comes in to Parliament and leaves as was when it was presented to us.
Yet we've seen a lot of this legislation encounter a lot of legal hurdles, which would have been resolved or remedied at the House level. That probably if a Senate or the National Assembly would have noticed some of these loopholes, probably the kind of legal hurdles.
No. You see, this is a problem. You know, lawmaking is not a very simple exercise. Because remember, you're making law for 40 million plus Kenyans. People have different views. People have different perspectives. There are different interests that you need to weave around. Therefore, anytime you have moved a particular legislation and you have agreed, when stakeholders come before you, chances are there are stakeholders who will disagree with a certain position, others will agree. Eventually, when as a stakeholder I appear before a parliamentary committee and I'm very insistent on a particular position, if that position doesn't find favor with the members of that committee and eventually on the floor of the House, then the next recourse, naturally as expected by our laws, is that you'll rush to the courts. And I do not agree with the jurisprudence that has been built over legislation that has been passed on the floor of the Houses. I think judges should exercise a lot of restraint before shooting down any legislation. Why do I say so? Article 2 of our Constitution, and even Article 1 as well, where people either exercise their powers directly or through their elected representatives. When Parliament sits to resolve on a particular matter, it is akin to the gathering of the entire nation once a legislation has gone through the Houses of Parliament, then when as a judge you go down and sit and consider that a certain petitioner has come before you, at what point or what position do you provide the platform for the other millions of Kenyans who through their representatives have voted in a particular way?
Even if this piece of legislation defies the Constitution?
I mean, how many times and by the way, hardly do you find that that piece of legislation, many of these legislations that are being shut down by courts are on account of constitutionalism. Many a times is on issues of position that, oh, you shouldn't do this because it's a certain, if it offends a certain principle, or very flimsy reason sometimes. In fact, many of the times, it's on account of public participation. And what do they mean about public participation? They say that you must demonstrate to us that people came, they gave their stakeholder views, and you consider them. Now, what is considering stakeholders? Does it mean that for every Kenyan or interested party that appears before us as a House of Parliament and takes a certain position on an issue, we are supposed to agree with them? It's not possible. There are some that we will agree with. Yes. There are some that will hold a different view.
In the case of the affordable housing plan,
yes,
the kind of hurdle it encountered, I think the courts mentioned the fact that there was discrimination.
Yes.
Yes. And by virtue of the fact that the Houses of Parliament brought in legislation afterwards,
yes,
it's seen as an admission of failure in the first place to actually pinpoint that problem. That's the question I'm asking. That some of these issues pass through Parliament, you're not able to pick out the loopholes, then they end up in court.
I wouldn't know what was the wisdom of the National Assembly in anchoring the affordable housing plan in the finance bill. Maybe the thinking, and this is what I heard because I followed the debate when it appeared before the House, that given that this is a levies and taxes issue, then the legislation that covers all legislation across the country is a finance bill. Therefore, they felt that this is a proper place to anchor it. The judges held a different view. They said you're supposed to provide a legislative anchor to it. You provide a platform upon which this program stands on its own. We held a slightly different view, but then you ask yourself, do you want to waste time in courts, appealing and doing all these things while you could actually come back to Parliament and say the things they are raising, especially on two issues. Number one, on having a legal framework that guides this particular program. And secondly, on the issue of discrimination, because the thinking was, strictly speaking, income tax is paid by all Kenyans. Strictly speaking. If you say every Kenyan pays income tax. No. Every Kenyan. In fact, that's the argument, just like you. But in truth and in reality, it is only us, people like you and me, that have a formal salary that pay income tax. The rest of the Kenyans, what do? When they go to KRA to file their returns, they file nil. And nobody follows them because it's considered like a sort of like accommodating and bearing with each other, that I don't have a job, I don't have a salary, I may earn something small here and there, but surely do you want to tax me for that? And that was the thinking of our colleagues in the assembly, because they said, why don't we keep this levy within those that have as a formal employment where you're able to trace and know how much they're earning. But then LSK and other entities. And I grew up knowing that LSK as an institution built their stature by speaking up for the ordinary citizen, are the ones actually that went to court and said, no. We want every Kenyan to pay. Now, that means we were forced, and that's what we have had to do on this floor, to make sure that every Kenyan, whether you earn salary in the way that we know it, or you are a ordinary hustler who earns little money here and there doing manual jobs, you have to part with something to run this affordable housing program. Even KRA will have lots of challenge in making collections, because just like income tax, they hardly collect anything from those that are not formally employed. The same will be the challenge that they'll face. But nonetheless, just like in the income tax bracket, the law is provided, you may just leave it so that if there are people, if KRA on its own doesn't have the mechanism of getting these people, so be it. But you provide for it in law. That's what we had to do. We had to do.
Okay, let's move on now to the relationship between the Senate and the National Assembly. And You have recently raised issue with the manner in which the National Assembly has been treating some of the legislation that originates from the Senate. Case in point, you spoke about the Natural Resources Benefit Sharing Bill of 2022 and the Employment Amendment Bill of 2022, which had already been passed by Senate. And one wonders, this is 10 years later, and why are we still experiencing this kind of supremacy battle, sibling rivalry between the two houses?
In a bicameral parliament, such as the one we have in Kenya, these issues take time to resolve. And it's unfortunate that 3 terms down the line, we haven't been able to put our hands around it successfully. And I've been in parliament for all those 3 terms that Kenya has had bicameral parliament, and I have seen how we have evolved. Previously, things were much rougher than it is. The afternoons in my early days in parliament, where we spent the entire afternoon from 2:30 to 6:30 bashing our colleagues in the assembly, and the assembly also extended even their sittings up to 9 p.m. talking about nothing other than nyumba ya wazee and all that. I think we have since overgrown that and have now come to live or agree to the fact that none of us is going anywhere. We are all here to stay. And therefore, what remains are positions of principle where our perspective and our understanding of, say, Article 110 of our Constitution varies with what colleagues in the Assembly believe. They strongly believe that so long as in their determination they find that any bill doesn't necessarily concern counties, they shouldn't consider sending it here to the Senate. But we strongly believe that a question arises at the point where speakers are doing the concurrence, because the constitutional edict is that before any house considers a bill, the speakers are supposed to make a determination. Does this bill concern counties or it doesn't? Our colleagues, of course, insist that constitutionally a question must arise. And the way for a question to arise, cheekily, and I say cheekily, they say somebody has to raise it on the floor and not on the Senate side, but on the Assembly and say, I think this issue concerns. Then once the question arises, then the Speaker makes a determination. So we are now almost agreeing. And a few weeks ago, we sat down in a meeting, actually chaired by none other than the President, who said, I'm concerned about this sibling rivalry that doesn't seem to end. From our first 2 terms when he was deputy and now as president, he continues to see it play out. Says, you guys, you're likely to derail even government programs on account of failure to agree on processes. So what was resolved in that meeting, which has since happened, is that the leader of majority in the Assembly, through his committees, would move a bill on bicameral relations that captures the understanding of how both houses are supposed to transact legislation.
Meaning you'll need more legislation to end this stalemate.
Because it's a neater thing to do.
Okay.
Last time, we had actually done this in a bill that was called Nature of Determination of Bills. But we passed it in the Senate, and of course our colleagues said, you guys never even consulted us. So it gathered dust in the Assembly until the end of the term of Parliament. This time, we agreed that we'll allow our colleagues in the Assembly to have their say. They have since considered and passed the bill. The bill has been referred. I've moved it. I haven't moved. Is undergone first reading. Now it's because it is before our Justice and Legal Affairs Committee. Okay. What they will do is that they will input into law our perspective as Senate. And of course, given that it's a bill, they will delete everything that they do not agree with. Then what will happen? The bill will be referred back to the Assembly. Chances are, of course, it's natural, they will not agree to the changes that we have made. Therefore, you do what is called a mediation. And the mediation now is when we'll come and conclude that process. And once we sign off the report and it's passed in both houses, then there is a law that guides the process. Oh. Even the Supreme Court of the Republic of Kenya has asked us to do this, that you are putting us in a very awkward situation, having to choose between 2 houses of parliament and be involved in exercises that, to our understanding, is a very simple thing which both you as both houses, you need to agree on what basically is the process, what is a constitution edict. And I believe we are likely to agree. We have made most progress than has ever been made in the previous parliaments. So in the next, we are now on recess this week, and next week we are back. Once we come back, Justice and Legal Affairs maybe has about a week or two to consider this particular bill. We will input our views as a Senate. We'll send it to the Assembly. In another 1 or 2 months, this will be a thing of the past.
And now, Senator, you both houses are called to attend to something in common. That's a Nadco report. And there seems to be concerns. And the Azimio side, the Azimio leadership has already suggested that there's a general lack of goodwill from the Kenya Kwanza team on processing the bills emanating from this report. This is a report that was developed in a bipartisan way. You were part of that team. And one may wonder, is there any hesitation from your end in processing those bills?
And Stephen Kalonzo Musyoka speak about it, and I thought probably that wasn't the right thing to do, because number one, he was a member of a committee. He knows how much we both had to bend backwards to accommodate each other as members of the two different coalitions. And he appreciates that Parliament has its own unique ways, set out ways of doing business. Since that report was tabled in Parliament, we have passed, both houses have successfully passed the reports. We have published the bills. I have signed off the bills. There were 8 bills in total. We divided 4 equally. Leader of majority and minority leader actually co-sponsors the bills in the Assembly side. I and Senator Mazayo, the leader of minority in the Assembly, are co-sponsoring the bills that were agreed will be sponsored on the Senate side. They have just begun their process in the Senate, the usual being referred to the committee. They were read the first time and they've been referred to the committees. These bills, of course, will take time, like any ordinary bill. Must go through first reading, then stakeholder engagement, because just like we were talking about a few minutes ago, stakeholder engagement is a constitutional
is that the bone of
demand.
contention? Because I know members of the Azimio side had said that the bills, once, because they had already been agreed upon, they should not be subjected to public participation. Is that the main issue?
What do you do? Because remember, the Nadco report and the bipartisan nature in which it was agreed upon doesn't suspend the Constitution. This is a constitutional demand that we must meet. There is no way. In fact, the quickest way to defeat any bill of Parliament today is just to go to courts and demonstrate that indeed there was no public participation and the bill is dead on arrival. Therefore, we'd wish that our colleagues do appreciate that.
Is that the reason why?
No, that's not the bond. I think I don't know. That's why I said I was shocked when I watched Kalonzo say that, because to the best of my knowledge, there is no stalemate in Parliament. What he's talking about, for example, we also proposed in the committee, or rather agreed in the report, that there is to be an audit of the electoral process. And we agreed that the majority and the minority side shall each nominate 3 persons, and they will develop the terms of reference for an audit of the electoral process, and then an institution, we left it to the determination of the houses, either Parliament directly or IEBC, or the principles will guide otherwise, will onboard an audit firm to go through the electoral process of 2022 with a view to improving our electoral systems. We have since given out the names. The minority side has given out the names. The challenge that we have, though, is that we are relying on the budget of Parliament. The speakers have said, remember, this report of yours came in February. Parliamentary budgets are done. So you admit there has been some natural delay, probably. It's not a delay of any sort, because they have told us, we hear you, we have seen your letters, but allow us to take it through the normal processes. Check if we can find you some money to commence this exercise. That's the only thing that somebody can say, perhaps, has delayed. But delayed for how long? We're not talking even about months. It's just a few weeks ago that they wrote, I think 3 or 4 weeks ago. We wrote 3 or 4 weeks ago, but the bills are progressing. The other bills that are constitutional amendments, we agreed at a meeting chaired by both speakers of Parliament and leadership from both sides were present, that we send the constitutional amendment bill to Justice and Legal Affairs Committee of both houses, a joint committee. those committees are supposed to look at the legal soundness of whatever we are proposing. Because remember, eventually, if we were to just steamroll it, as you were saying a few minutes ago, and pass the things that they are without being considered by a committee of parliament, then that provides fodder for those who are opposed to this process. And you know there are so many on both sides of the coalition. There are many who, for one reason or the other, they don't believe in this process. I mean,
but they also argue that probably Kenya Kwanza entered into the bipartisan discussion reluctantly, that it was not really what they wanted, but they needed to pacify the political situation then.
We agreed actually on virtually everything. In fact, it's not accurate what our colleagues in the Azimio side are contesting, that perhaps we didn't agree on the issue of cost of living. We told them it is our mandate as a government in power to put in place sound policies to bring down the cost of living.
Even on the thorny issue of what they call it?
Fuel levy?
Parties. No, the political parties. Allegiance to political parties and fidelity to political parties.
Yes.
That's the word.
We agreed, but what we told them is that there are certain constitutional doctrines that we cannot claim to violate, especially given the fact that we had no intention of going through a referendum. You know very well, to amend the Bill of Rights, you have to go back to the people, which wasn't our intention. Part of the things that they wanted us to input in the political parties bill, there are obvious violations against the Bill of Rights, like the right to association. Like if you're a member of, say, ODM, and you're seen in a photo with the party leader of UDA at State House, that is ground enough to say that you're not loyal. As a leader of majority, and as a person who believes in that process, who participated in it with all my energy and soul, that there is every intention on the Kenya Kwanza side to ensure that this report is implemented in its entirety. That's why we have moved all the 4 bills in this house, and in the assembly as well, the bills have commenced. I will be pushing our Justice and Legal Affairs Committee, when they reconvene after recess, to give priority and give us back report, because they are supposed to report back to us within 45 days. And those 45 days haven't lapsed.
Now, one of the natural consequences of what's happening with what they're calling the delay in passing this Nadco bills is a delayed reconstitution of the IEBC. And one of the main issues that many people are not discussing is the issue of delimitation and review of boundaries. The deadline, as provided for by the Constitution, lapsed last month. Yes. So it means we're already in defiance of the Constitution. No one has even moved to court seeking an advisory on that issue. But if we continue in this state of defiance of the Constitution, there must be consequences. What is your take on that issue?
Of course there'll be consequences, but I mean, what do? It wasn't intentional on anybody's part. When we met immediately, we came back this session. It was decided in the meeting that I mentioned to you, the first meeting with the leadership of both sides, that the IEBC bill commences in the assembly. I want to believe they have begun the process. In fact, I asked somebody in the assembly a few days ago, and they told me probably on the week that they resume after recess, which is actually next week, they are likely to do second reading of that particular bill. Then obviously it will come to the Senate, and we'll try to work on it, because indeed there are certain inherent threats which I kept on reminding my colleagues, even on the opposite side when we were at Bomas. You are aware that there is a case already, and a determination has been made by the High Court that the the IEBC selection panel, for example, should conclude the exercise that they are undertaking in Naivasha and proceed to give us an IEBC. But of course that will find us at a stalemate. If they were to proceed and do that, then we'll find ourselves in a very difficult situation. But then that gives reason why we need to conclude on this particular bill, so that we don't not only handle the issue of delimitation, because we need to make a decision on it, but also there are various wards, I think about 15 wards in the country, that have stayed without a member of the county assembly. That's serious violation of their rights. There is a constituency that has stayed for over a year without their MP there are petitions that are in the final days before the Supreme Court, and probably a decision may be rendered this way or the other. So I agree with you that there is urgency, and we don't want to find ourselves.
There are those who argue that this is probably, and in a cheeky way, by design and not by default, that probably it's not the kind of conversations that politicians would want to have at this point. That if at all the delimitation and review of boundaries can be delayed as much as possible, it would benefit politicians more than anyone else.
No, not really, because in any case, we don't have a choice. It's a constitutional demand. So either way,
we
have to do it. And we are in defiance, but upon the selection of IEBC, then this issue will confront them square, and they will have to make a decision of what to do with the country at that particular point. Of course, you know, Fred, that in the Nadco report, we proposed an extension and say perhaps given the economic situation where the country is in, and many other factors that we were thinking about, things like do you add more constituencies, do you reduce, and whether this is the right time to do it given the challenges that we are facing as a country. And we thought perhaps we could vary that particular deadline, but that still must go through both houses. Yes. In a constitutional amendment.
So there is a general consensus that that process should be delayed,
yes,
not come at this time.
But either way, IEBC must be in office first to consider and look into all those factors. You know, there are basic things even that people may want to consider, even change of name and things like that, which IEBC needs to make a decision on. So it's a critical issue, which unfortunately as Parliament we haven't been able to live up to the demands of the Constitution, but something that we need to rectify very soon. Okay.
Let's now move to some politics and party politics. And the UDA party, of which you are a member, has embarked on a very ambitious and dicey process of grassroots elections. Even ODM is attempting the same. Sometime this month, and that in itself brings out a lot of issues. This was an exercise that was intended to happen in December last year, but before that, the exercise
leader, President Ruto, we felt that we owe it to our members, because the rank and file of the party wants this election. They want to proudly belong to this party. They want to hold us as elected officials to account. They want to have a voice also, just beyond the normal conversation about political parties. They want to be there and ask us, what are you doing to fulfill the promises that we made to the people, and so on and so forth. Therefore, despite the fact that maybe there are certain issues that members felt needed to be addressed first before we can proceed to an election, I think the general reasoning that prevailed in that room yesterday was that let us have these elections so that our own members can participate and put in place officials who will guide the party, because, you know, a political party is a tool of governance. Even in its own self, it is your party, say, chairman at the county level, that can summon you and ask you certain questions and say, as an elected officials, are you living up to the constitution of the party?
But you must agree, it does bring up some very uncomfortable conversations.
Of course, especially with the elected officials.
Yes, and the provision in the UDA constitution for 3 deputy party leaders, of which, especially in the Mount Kenya region, have been very hesitant to go that route because they are concerned about the position of the deputy president vis-a-vis those.
Fortunately, in this election, we don't intend to go to the national level. They all terminate at county chairperson level. So that's a conversation that we'll have now, perhaps, I think either later in the year or early next year, or now when to conduct the national elections at the national level for all these positions at the national office. As it is presently, it is not something that is up for discussion. What people are more concerned with is whether, like in any political party, your competitors or people don't like you, if they assume positions of great responsibility within the party, are you safe as an elected member of parliament, for example, as a member of county assembly, as a governor, if somebody who was
as a senator?
As a senator.
Is this the conversation happening? Because I know you've raised issue with the recent event involving the member for Dikir, Johanna Ngeno, about installation as a community leader. Is that in any way linked to this UD elections?
No,
because there must be a lot of supremacy battles now at the county levels. Yes,
the various regions. No, it doesn't, because in any way these are county positions, so there is no conversation about intra-county positions. I think those conversations now will become more active when you're doing the national elections, where people now have to host trade and seek support beyond the county.
We are at a time when Kenyans are staring at so many different crises, from security with the banditry attacks in North Rift, agriculture with the claims of distribution of fake fertilizer. Health ministry is in turmoil with the doctor strike, and now clinicians have joined in and other health workers. Even road and transport could be said to have issues or questions that need to be answered with the continued occurrences of road accidents. Now these are major sectors of the economy, and one may wonder when you have 5 sectors of the society or governance appearing to be in crisis, and the government is just firefighting, that it could be an indictment on the performance of the cabinet.
Well, both yes and no. Yes, in the sense that there are certain things that could have been avoided. No, in the sense that there are certain things that are beyond them. For example, let me even pick with the last issue that you mentioned, road accidents. We are all very concerned as a country. It cannot be that as a civilized society, we lose upwards of 4,000 people every year through road accidents. So when CS Murkomen appeared before us, I think about 2 or 3 weeks ago, he was asked on the floor here that when you appeared for your vetting, you did mention that you intend to deploy technology, because if you analyze, Fred, and you know this because I know you drive or at least use our roads, that the biggest challenge that we have on our roads and that are causing all this accident is the indiscipline of our drivers. Maybe 10% because of the nature of the roads. Some of the roads are still small, there's too much traffic, and therefore some of these accidents occur naturally because of infrastructure deficit. But 90% is lack of discipline by a driving force. And therefore, what did he propose? He said we will deploy the use of technology to find people as a deterrence measure, because that's what civilized societies do. There's no rocket science in this. If you overspeed, in many of these countries that have been able to curb road accidents, you're instantly fined. If you repeat it within a certain period of time, you lose your license and therefore lose the ability to drive. And they have deployed technology sufficiently. So what is the challenge in Kenya? And he told the House that unfortunately, somebody went to court when they were trying to roll out the digital plates and argued that you cannot compel Kenyans to all have digital plates, because you know you need to have RFID enabled car number plates for the cameras to capture you and of course do that process of implementation of fine. These things of NTSA and police officers, we have long concluded that they are never going to work. So what do you do in such a situation? Remember, when they ordered again as the transport ministry that we need to test our drivers one more time, there was a strike, then I think people went to court, they were granted orders. So now tell me, Fred, in such a situation where there is a judgment by the courts, and I wonder and wish to know who this judge is, and perhaps ask them, are you equally not concerned? Don't you simply understand why government is trying to implement some of these policies like that one? Why would you stop an exercise that is meant to save lives? Which is the overall challenge that you're having with our judiciary. If you reflect, for example, on the issue of the fertilizer, and both houses of parliament are conducting investigations. What I know for a fact is that Ministry of Agriculture floated a tender for supply of this fertilizer. There are people who are pre-qualified, and they agreed that they could supply the specific type of fertilizer that we needed. But it turns out, from what we're hearing now, that some of them may have supplied substandard fertilizer. Therefore, somebody has to take responsibility.
Yet the CS has raised issue with that assertion. It says that it's fake news. There's no fake fertilizer.
There was a way within which...
Because the question is about the conduct of members of cabinet in handling this crisis.
Exactly. There was a way also in which he's right, in the sense that when the opposition jumped on it, and I told you, unfortunate thing with our opposition is that they play what you would call politics without principle, where it's just an argument. Remember, this same program, implemented by the same minister last year, because of the successful implementation of this program, we added 200,000 hectares of land under cultivation. We have sufficient food. You haven't seen opening up of importation of maize into the country on account of very successful implementation of this program. Properly deployed, registered farmers. Do you know for a fact, Fred, that when we came into government, that there was a bill of close to 8 billion shillings that had been set aside to register farmers? But do you know how much this administration spent? Less than 100 million shillings, because they used the provincial administration to register each farmer complete with their size of land, and that is what determines the number of fertilizer bags that you're given, and you pay, you receive a voucher, you go to NCPB, and you redeem your voucher and get your fertilizer. Successfully implemented last year. Because of that success, definitely, there has been huge interest. First by farmers, because they are happy with the fertilizer that they received last year. It gave them a bumper harvest. But secondly, by also business players who want now to participate in this program.
Are you reading sabotage in this?
Of course. Remember, when we used to issue gazettement of importation of maize from outside the country, there were people who used to do that business. Do you think they are sitting happily now knowing that the country is about to be food sufficient? There are people who are selling this fertilizer at 7,000 and making a kill. Now that it has been reduced to 2,500 Kenya shillings, they can't sit pretty on their laurels as they watch their business disappear. Okay. Therefore, what the minister, and this is a part that I think my good friend C.S. Linturi needs to up his game, is that he needs to confirm to the country who are the listed providers of this fertilizer. How many of them have the certifications from KEBS and what tests were done? Then finally, of the fertilizer bags that citizens have raised questions about, how many have been found to indeed fail the standards test? And therefore, KEBS needs to answer and tell us, how did this fertilizer, because there were random tests. You know what happens when you do importation via the port. They come and pick random samples so that to make it difficult for you to collude from the shipment that you brought in. And once you have done the test, it is certified and say it is fit for use to do the purpose for which it was intended. So we need to know which are these companies. Okay. And that is what the CS is taking long to reveal to the country. And I wish he can speak up on that so that we can resume, because believe you me, the other problem that we have, Fred, unfortunately, and I know this because I speak to farmers, I'm their representative, there's a certain type of how fertilizer looks like that citizens were used to. But this specific type that the ministry put together doesn't take that form and shape.
It looks different.
It looks different. So people, when they look at it, they say, this is not fertilizer, because they expect some white granules. Okay. And therefore, we want to tell people also, don't turn yourself into a cabs of some sort.
Okay. Because now the issue is the disjointed communication.
Yes, exactly.
From different cabinet ministers.
Exactly.
Now from the leader of majority in the Senate, on whether or not there is actually fake fertilizer in distribution. The last report that I read is that the National Development Something Committee, the one chaired by I think head of public service or something, when they made the decision to stop the distribution until first they certify whether the claims were true,
That's a report that I'm awaiting.
So there's still not confirmation. There's still no confirmation.
Up to now, no confirmation has been issued.
What about, let's move on to the security sector now, because
Yes.
you've been on record, you are on record calling for the resignation of the police IG.
Yes.
Yet blame could also be placed on the foot of the CS for Interior. He has been at the forefront.
Yes.
And he got a lot of accolades initially, immediately after his appointment
Yes.
to that docket, when he traveled to the northern Kenyan parts. And still, we actually see that these bandits are getting even more brazen.
Yeah. The security situation is not, first of all, I didn't call for the resignation of the IG, but I asked, where is he? The reason I asked, where is the IG, is because Article 249 of our Constitution, the Inspector General exercises independent command over the police service. The minister is only in charge of policy. So while CS Kindiki may be well-meaning and wants to inspire the officers, truthfully speaking, the head of operation, the person who has the operational command of what needs to happen, is the IG. CS Kindiki may be a brilliant man, but he knows nothing about policing. He doesn't even know how to handle a gun. Perhaps he cannot distinguish a bullet from a pencil. His job is purely policy. And what you see him doing, moving from one county and various disturbed zones to the other, is just part of his work in ensuring that they have properly resourced the officers on the ground, they are properly trained, they have been provided for whatever they need. But the person who is supposed to issue the command, lead the troops, is the Inspector General and his deputies. Therefore, I was very much concerned that I wasn't seeing him, and I'm happy because I think on Monday this week or yesterday I saw him finally in the North Rift, in Kerio Valley, because that's where he should be. And all these other parts, Lamu and Samburu, and all these places that are considered disturbed zones, being with his officers and appreciating what are the challenges, what are the issues, because when you speak to leaders from that region, they tell you that if you engage these officers, they tell you, some of them either for one reason or the other are not motivated or don't have the conviction that the exercise they are doing can succeed. Some of them are saying, I'm not here to risk my life. This problem has been there since 1960s. If those who are there never finished it, who am I? I'm not Jesus to come and die for you. Therefore, there are certain structural failures that needs to be addressed and cannot be addressed on policy basis alone. Needs to be addressed by the operational commander so that he gives certain instructions, and there's a way in which the police needs to operate different from what was being done. And therefore, that's what I was questioning the IG about, and I hope that he can be able to lead. In fact, between him and his two deputies, because he has two deputies, they need to be changing shifts every now and then, operating from that particular country until they secure that part of the country.
And finally, let's focus on the health sector. And I'm concerned, not really concerned, I'd just like to know if you would seek to exonerate the CS on her conduct in handling this current stalemate as well. You so far said all the cabinet secretaries in the sectors we mentioned, they should not take it directly.
Remember I said there are certain things perhaps Linturi needs to do better. There are certain things which I felt the CS for transport perhaps needs to address as well, and campaign hard about, speak on these issues.
When it comes to the health sector,
health sector, CS Nakumincha means well. The best of my knowledge has tried, but she can do better. How can she do better? I think in a moment of crisis such as this, her sole dedication needs to be resolving this crisis that is here. I don't think she should be seen anywhere else other than meeting from morning to evening until perhaps you resolve that particular stalemate with the doctors. Because much as what you're telling them is, what you're asking is impossible, I believe they are human beings. And there are certain things which if they were to engage, some may be beyond her, but with the support of the head of public service and her cabinet colleagues, because this is an issue that involves, of course, there are labor issues there. There are both issues that overlap, because health is a devolved function. Therefore, there are issues like promotion and the rest, which I've seen as part of the list of demands from the doctors, which can only be done by the county governments. But of course, she can lead in coordinating that particular exercise. Those that are cross-cutting across ministries, need to refer them to the head of public service, so that perhaps you bring in officials from the more than one ministry that are supposed to address this. We need to see her. And the other thing which probably we need to engage and appreciate is, if you walk on the street and ask an ordinary Kenyan, why are doctors on strike? The average Kenyan might not necessarily be able to explain to you what the issues are.
Okay.
And that needs to come out for people to appreciate and know. So what exactly is the bone of contention, so that citizens can then judge and say, between the ministry and the doctors, who's on the right, who's on the wrong. So there's yes, she's committed, but could do better with sole dedication and keep off engaging on any other issues. I know when I say that it's not the right thing to say, but that's my personal opinion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to the president, because we've looked at all these sectors, and some may argue that the president has become uncharacteristically very quiet at a time when his voice could help. Why do you think he is silent, and do you think that's the best way to go, given the fact that he has previously commented on the ability of some of these cabinet members to actually do the job?
He is silent because we criticized him as Kenya. Remember last year, where people were saying he's a super minister. He's in charge of this, he keeps abreast on the other, and this and that. Therefore, I don't know, this is not a conversation that I've had with him, but I think as a leader, if you're told you're too involved that even the people you've charged with the mandate are not being seen, then you step back so that you allow people to execute their mandate. Observing the president between January of this year and now that we're in April, I think that's the approach that he has decided to take on many of these issues, which is to allow members of his cabinet and the ministries that they lead to battle with the issues that are before them, so that eventually the only place he meets with them is in cabinet. They do their presentation, either they agree with what they are proposing or disagree, but then allows them the space, because people said, I thought it was a good thing. When you're CEO...
That style of leadership.
Yes, when you're CEO, you need to know all your departments and how they work, from finance to human resource to marketing to research and development. But then if people insist and say, no, step back a bit so that the heads of those departments can be seen, and they run it. So I felt he has done well. The one thing that I kept on speaking about, I've said it on the floor, and I have mentioned to him in private, and I know it's not something that he can be mad if I speak about it publicly, because in any case my views are public on this, is that I felt we were still living way beyond our means. And therefore I was extremely excited last week when I saw the resolutions of the meeting that they had with the state departments and the leadership therein. First of all, asking them to reduce on the budget, because I kept on saying, and I say this even this year when we had our inaugural parliamentary group meeting that was attended by cabinet, that it doesn't make sense for me while we are doing a 3 trillion budget, yet we know for a fact that we don't have that kind of money. We need to live within our means. And I kept on saying that. I was glad. As we speak today, you know, this is a budget season, and we had done the budget policy statement, usual way, but each state department has been asked to reduce their expenditure by 30%. And that is a step in the right direction, because it's not just a revenue problem. It's more of an expenditure issue more than even the revenue side. We must reduce the expenditure side. There's just too much that we are doing, and I don't want to sound cliche and say wastage. It's not necessarily wastage. It's important, but can you do it now? It's what you and I do when we find ourselves in a difficult financial situation.
Okay.
Even if you want to pay for your cable television, if this month you didn't make as much, you just stay and follow the results online. You don't have to watch the game.
All right.
You know. So I am impressed that is finally being done. Yet I know it's not an easy fight. Until that appropriation is passed here on the floor of the assembly with a 30% reduction, then I'll be glad and happy and say that finally fiscal responsibility is taking shape. And I'm glad that as president, he has taken lead on that project, because I can tell you, there is nobody else who can do it.
Okay.
That is a job that only he can, and I'm happy that he's finally doing that.
Senator, any final words as we conclude?
I am just pleading that there are two programs which are very dear to us as a Kenya Kwanza administration. And we must do everything within our powers to ensure that they succeed. One, the universal health coverage. What do I mean by everything within our powers? We have passed the legislation. But now looking back, I feel there's something that we missed out. We must make it extremely difficult and punish as punitively as possible anybody who tries to mess that program by pilfering the funds that you're going to raise. Because good initiatives in this country, unfortunately, have died at the altar of corruption. And you know very well that that is a national struggle that we battle with, administration after the other, including our administration. It is my conviction that perhaps later on this year, if there's a part of those legislations that we need to still tighten, is to make it impossible, and if you dare, make it impossible by putting deterrent measures, including even death penalty. Because there are many citizens, Fred, that their lives completely become shattered the minute a family member falls sick. And you know medication is extremely expensive in this country. UHC, in the structure that we did, remember there is a chronic and critical illness fund that we created, for example, that now, once that fund is set up, if a family member, unfortunately, say has cancer, we don't have to sell everything that we have, as is the case right now. They'll make application to that fund and they'll be able to go through their treatment without having to dispose of everything that they own, as is the case presently. Now, imagine somebody messing up with such a fund. What punishment is enough for such a person? Therefore, the point that I make is that on our side as Parliament, we must be able to make sure that we put enough deterrent measures. But unfortunately, I know Kenya, and I know, unfortunately, people compromise institutions of oversight. Parliament, EACC, DCI, and all these things. So we must be vigilant if we believe in that particular program, because the only thing that stands between the successful implementation of that program and failure is corruption. And I hope that nobody dares mess up with that one. Same for the affordable housing program. We'll create jobs, will provide us with now land to be able to do agriculture, as opposed to everybody building on their own small little farm. And of course, spur our economy, because this is money that is being channeled mostly to the rural areas, and it will regenerate. It's an economic stimulus program of some sort. But the people who dare joke with that particular money, we should not spare them.
Senate Majority Leader Aaron Cheruiyot, thank you so much for your time with us here at TV47. Yes, we've been having this one-on-one interview with the Senate Majority Leader, and you've been watching it right here on the Daily Report on TV47. Don't go anywhere.